Glorify the King. Father Yahweh, in the name of your Son, the Yeshua, I glorify you in spirit and in truth, and in the very beauty of holiness. May your name be magnified on this earth through this young man and through his brothers and his sisters of full breed. Today on the streets, they are common. They are the commoners, so to speak. Yet they are, and we are the commoners through the true sovereign of this country. Now, what took place in the Honorable House of Assembly today I would let the Rhodes Scholars ponder on that. But I would say to those of us who are not as educated as them, who acted today in the People's House with absolute contempt. You see, the Speaker was correct in saying, or at least pointing out, the procedures of the Honorable House. However, and yes, and rightfully so, when they were in, the F&M were in, they did their thing. Now the PLB is in, they're doing their thing. However, I have no time. This is why I want the Bahamian people to decide among themselves who leading this country. I'm here to point out issues in respect to sovereignty of it all, the sovereignty of it all, the enormous value in totality, fundamental totality. I'm here to point out that the accusations made by myself in respect to the Bahamas government being a corrupt government in respect to their foreign direct invaders and invasion of policies versus the Bahamian direct investors investing in their country. You see, that's not promoted, because to promote that is to bring the true name of the Bahamians, who are either highly educated and deserving of the honor of this type of financial, economic honor, that these two prime ministers, two ministers of finance, the sitting minister of finance and the former minister of finance, have lorded over our country for 22, going into the 23rd year. I'm here to fire the Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, with the greatest and most utmost respect, in respect to the sovereign wealth of the people of this country, you have failed this house. Thus, there is nothing in my cupboards, because there is nothing in the cupboards of the common man. Now, I refuse to go another day to see another old person walk by me, walk past me, back and forward, week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out, specifically and primarily for over 5 years on the F&M. These people and myself, we got rocked, so much so, you guys won the government. Today, you are building on that temple of destruction. But I'm here to point out to the Bahamian sovereigns, such as myself, heirs and successors of these commoners of islands. We have a lot in common. And over the past 40 years, primarily the past 22 plus years, there were 2 ministers of finance who have been given the privilege to serve the honorable people of this country. That's the Bahamians, such as myself, whose grandparents fought in these ways. One, some of the men, be it that they were born in the early 1900s, such as my grandfather, Willis Miller, W-I-L-L-I-S, Miller, was one such Bahamian offspring of the Atlantic slave order / trade. Thus, we ended up in the Bahamas. Now, as it relates to the Bahamas, I give thanks to the Most High God today, on this 7th day of the 8th month. So I will put in memory of 78, the 7 in front of the 8. Either which way, you add the 8 and the 7, you get 15. 1 plus 5 is 15. Now, all right, 8 plus 7, pardon me, 8 plus 7 is 15. 1 plus 5 is 6. My thoughts are so deep today, I was easily distracted. Thus, I'm here to say to the nation and to the world, in 1978, it is my opinion and my view, acting in conspiracy to infiltrate, to defraud, by fraud, by false pretense, the introduction of Mr. Hubert Alexander Ingram and Mr. Perry Glaston Christie, both men at the time, would have been introduced into Bahamian politics, so coming in together, being very close Bahamian male partners and friends. Okay? Now, it is my opinion that these 2 ministers of finance that have one sitting today for the 2nd time, and the immediate past Minister of Finance, 3-time Minister of Finance, I'm of the opinion Amos J. Miller, now known as Israel, is of the opinion, and I'm free to express my opinion in respect to them being planted or at least trained to do this to us 40 years after our country would have went independent, 43 years after my birth. They were trained, in my view, in 1976 by the House of Windsor and the British government and their school, their law school, the program, the time and everything. These men, I'm of the opinion, were not good for our country, globally speaking, in respect to their foreign direct invasion. Mr. Christie, as Minister of Finance, did everything in his power to prevent myself from progressing in this country, thus doing a favor for the House of Windsor in respect to the lodges, the associations in the past that were formed in the early 1900s to memorialize and to serve as a memory stone, that which it is all about. The struggle, starvation. A man like myself, a Bahamian heir to all of this wealth that these families are playing around with. And by the way, let me digress for a minute. The charade in the Honorable House of Assembly today was exactly that, a charade. It was planned, it was plot. It is a plot, it's a plan, it's staged, it's not real. No matter what took place in the Honorable House today, it was staged to further carry on the conspiracy to cover up their conspiracy of fraud and to defraud this young man, one, and other young men and ladies, such as myself, but primarily young men, because the young men with whose last name in this case is a Miller, it is then known then in the country, in the southeast end of the country called the Bahamas. The Miller name then, in respect to these association and or the association, and the only association that the people agreed to become a part of, all the people, was called the Auckland's Crooked Island and Long Key Association. Auckland's Crooked Island and Long Key Association. Lodge and their president was chosen to speak the truth. These was people who fed the spirit of the word of God, not just the word. They believed in the spirit of the living God because of the words in the Holy Scriptures that they were taught. Yet, it was not a lie, but everything was not told in the total context. However, I am not David Walker. This is not a David Walker appeal. I am not the Yeshua, the Christ, my brothers on that street, and I, all of us together, when we are allowed to democratically, freely be granted the privilege to enjoy the wealth of our country, then we are living Yeshua. Yeshua is now living, reincarnated in that atmosphere. That atmosphere is the atmosphere, in my view, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights document and what it stands for. And thus I make my case. The charade that was staged, in my humble opinion, today in the Honorable House of the Honorable People's Assembly must be condemned. What it showed me, though, in respect to the conspiracy to defraud Amos J. Miller Israel from the rich history that him as a child was born into as it relates to his birth, the 2nd of June, 1970, and the establishment of the Auckland's Crooked Island and Long Key Association Lodge in 1965, and his grandfather Willis Miller being chosen year in and year out for more than 50 years plus to be recognized as the president because of, at least until the day of his death, he was recognized as the president. Now, that is where I come in, not to sit in the seat of my grandfather, because no man on the planet is worthy to sit in his seat. When I sit in the seat or in the physical chair that was owned by a man of the stature of a Sir Lyndon Oscar Pinlin in the mind and person of the Honorable People's Champion, Sir Clement Maynard, when I sit in anything where he sat before, I'm literally saying to the spirit of that generation, who then will have to admit that Willis Miller generation is senior. So they were privileged to sit in chief seats and seats of our nation because of men like them. And so I represents the symbol of it all. The original name was, is, and will always be Miller. Now, we have no more right in this country and to the country's resources in respect to chapter 3 of the Bahamian Constitution, primarily and specifically Article 15 and everything it represents, and Article 28 and everything it outlines in respect to Articles 16 to 27 of the Bahamian Constitution. Now, thus I want to take the opportunity and the moment to serve caution to the radio stations. I will not call the names of the Bahamian radio stations that are promoting Bahamians on the station who are speaking primarily Creole, saying, quote unquote, that the Haitian population of the Bahamian people are left out. Now, but left out of everything that is going on in the country, right? As it relates to, but he's speaking Bahamianese and speaking Creole and then translating what he said in Creole to Bahamian, saying that, outlining his name and his mission. It's basically that saying to the Haitian people that it is time for them to do what is necessary to be done to change this. I am here to say to that young man, sir, I agree with you. However, I'm also here to say to you, sir, when I go to Rome, I intend to do what the Romans do, or I will stay away from Rome. That's all I have to say, sir, to you. Now, every Bahamian, like I outlined, what the Millers are entitled to, sir, the Haitians that came to the Bahamas, for whatever reason, the women Haitians, and they had children here, for other Haitian men, sir, the Bahamian right that you talk about, that's not exclusive because you're born here. Now, maybe you were misunderstood. Maybe you misunderstand that because the last or former prime minister given 3 opportunities to serve the people, and in most cases, a lot of foreigners were granted citizenship because they have a lot of money and influence other places in the world. Basically, when it came to this part of the world, all they needed was money to influence their gold or to establish a foot in this country. I'm here to say to every Bahamian that were born here, to foreign parents, 1, sir, you are what is called a first generation, okay, Bahamian. The second generation Bahamian is the Haitian woman who had a baby for a Bahamian male. That child, still under Bahamian law, is a Bahamian. He's just what I called a second generation Bahamian, meaning that he has an original seed Bahamian for a father, but the mother is a Haitian. The third generation, bro, is that Bahamian who, when he born, such as myself, his mother and father was Bahamian. That's fourth generation. That mother and father, let's separate them now. Before the boy was born. The boy is me. Just keep that in mind. I'm that boy. So I'm third generation Bahamian. My mother and father, both of them, point one is from Acklands. But let's separate them before they had me and met one another. My mother, her mother and father, they're Bahamians. Okay? From Acklands, I might also add. Okay? But my mother represents the egg, the mother of creation for this boy, like all the other women. Now, I'm cautioning the world that, bear in mind, what I'm expressing and explaining, I have only come into many of this knowledge in the past 3 years, and so that is why I'm free and clear to declare who I am. So now, I want to now then talk about my father, because this is where most of this is emanating and coming from, because of who his father was. So my father then, his mother and father is Bahamian and was Bahamian, because they're now deceased. Okay, so this great man, Willis Miller, is now deceased. His generation, of which I speak of, who signed the book in respect to this child, them recognizing my grandfather as Mr. President for more than half of a century. Bahamas, this is the knowledge that Hubert Ingram, this is the conspiracy now. Why? Hubert Alexander Ingram, and I might add, former Right Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance for 3 times, an extra 5 days. And now sitting Prime Minister, Right Honorably, Perry Glasson Christie, pardon me, have conspiracized with others in London, England, and in America to continue a fraud to keep the house of Willis Miller down, to suppress and oppress, and to oppress by suppression. The suppression tactics that they were used was prosecution. At the first beginning, because of the legal things I, as a young man, did when I was younger, starting from the age, basically, of 16, spiritually and legally, physically, by the age of 18, 2022. Thus, my life changed. Bishop Neil Clarence Ellis was a first-hand witness of the change, the miraculous change that God, Yahweh, the Adonai, the Elohim, that I only knew at the time as Adonai, Elohim, that I would train as a child to know as Yahweh. But over the time growing up, the name was discontinued in the church. Thus, growing up and getting older after the miraculous change in my life, in the early 1996 to be exact, before the 1900 ends, the year 1900 and the entire century of the 1900 ended, as it relates to the Willis Miller house. That line, that house, that bloodline was in spiritual order. Thus, my son, and you could tell I was green to the knowledge of Yahweh, but it was planted in me from a child. I called and named my son Joshua Jared. Now his name to the world must be known as Joshua Yared. You see? Because of what I represent. I represent the Hebrew Israelite seed. I am the royal bloodline of the Hebrew Israelite seed. That is why I am saying these two ministers of finance give Mr. Christie 3 more years. And guess what? Happy independence to you, Mr. Christie, and to you, Mr. Ingram. 40-year independence, by the way, to you 2 men. Given Mr. Christie another 3 years, and those 2 ministers of finance both could brag that together collectively they are planned basically was longer than Sir Lyndon. They would have reigned longer than Sir Lyndon indirectly, because 2 years would be silent that they could not talk about. I cannot justify giving them another day. Thus I must fire Mr. Christie because of my bloodline. Now, the Bahamian people cannot vote for Amos Jr. Miller bloodline. Sir Lyndon Oscar Pendleton reigned because he recognized the old man who was his senior in respect to his aspirations. And I honestly don't believe Sir Lyndon probably wanted to be a politician. You'd be surprised to know what that man really wanted to be. I believe he was thrust into it by God Most High himself. Now, we could talk about why he was removed. The voice of the people, listen to me, is final. The options the people have in regards to both ministers of finance as of 1992 all the way to present 2013, 1, have shown absolute egregious contempt for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and everything it stands for, as relates to the house of Willis Miller. As relates to the house of Willis Miller. Thus, my birth, the 2nd of June, is important to these 2 men and the conspiracy of which I speak. Because for 16 years before my birth, Her Majesty, reigning sovereign, now for 60 years, minus 3 years before I born, okay, she would have been reigning for 16 years as reigning sovereign, and then I born, pardon me, on the 17th year. On the day they chose to honor her on the 2nd of June as reigning sovereign over the Commonwealth. Now, if this is not supernatural enough for anyone else on the planet, at least the Rhodes Scholars, and I think we have at least 3 on record, and at least 3 off record, that they, at least these 2 ministers of finance, former and present ministers of finance,